This is really a confirmation, I think, of what many people are discussing among themselves.
That's right, Laura. This survey really captures, I think, the changing public mood in Australia about lockdowns and the trade-offs inherent in them. I mean, I don't think last year would have ever imagined a survey which would have come out with these sort of findings, that in fact job losses and mental health are more important, are troubling people more than the fear of COVID deaths and COVID lockdowns. And it's interesting, if you dwell in these figures a bit, I mean, they're pretty stark. Like 1 in 3 people say they are financially worse off in the last 3 months alone. That's a lot. And with mental health, it's even more stark. In Victoria and New South Wales, which of course are both locked down, more than 50% of people say that their emotional well-being, they're emotionally worse off in the past 3 months. Now, these are pretty stark figures, and I think they really reflect the changing mood in the country, and they certainly will be sending a message to a lot of premiers, to New South Wales and Victoria especially, but I think also to the low COVID states who are still looking at lockdowns well into the future as a viable means of containing COVID.
Well, when you're living in a lockdown and COVID numbers are high, like they are in New South Wales, reality kind of smacks you in the face, doesn't it? When you're living a normal life, relatively, even though you are closed into your state, you can often forget that, we're going to have to learn to live with COVID. So, I mean, as vaccination rates get higher, do you think this survey shows that people need certainty? Not a freedom day so much, but that plan, and that might help alleviate these concerns.
Yeah, look, I think people are definitely looking at a plan. I mean, you're seeing these attitudes are shifting for 2 reasons, I think. One, certainly in the big states, Victoria and New South Wales, people are exhausted. They're absolutely over lockdowns. And while they're not saying let it rip, they're saying there's got to be a middle way of some form, some sort of pathway. And I think also, Laura, we're just learning so much more in recent months about the strain on mental health, especially with young children, teenagers. It's interesting. Another really interesting point about these surveys was how strong parents were on the issue of schools. More than half parents want schools open. More than half parents believe that long-term damage is being done to their children's education from lockdowns, and 60% of parents want schools open if teachers are vaccinated. You know, these sort of things are real markers that are just becoming much more front of mind in Australia, I think, as we go. And as vaccinations rates increase, as we get to understand more about treating COVID, and also as the level of death and hospitalisation is nothing like it was last year in Victoria, for example. So I think there really are changing parameters on all aspects of this debate.
I think this survey really backs up what we're all seeing, many of us are feeling. Again, on that anecdotal level, it's unscientific, but there's a higher level of anxiety. There is a change in the risk appetite. So I guess people are starting to weigh up, getting COVID or having this long run of uncertainty.
But that's right. I mean, what's interesting is that only 22% of people surveyed believe that lockdowns should continue until you get to zero COVID. Now, that really is a very small figure compared to what we would have found even a couple of months ago, and certainly last year. So there definitely is a hugely changing mood in that respect. And of course, I think it will continue to change in the sense that, I mean, you are getting very high vaccination take-up now, thankfully, across the country, especially, though, in the COVID-hit states of Victoria, New South Wales. As more and more people get vaccinated, as more and more people have access to the vaccine, I think you'll see people changing again. I mean, of course, once we get to the point where everyone who wants a vaccine has had a chance to have one, I think you'll see quite a dramatic shift, regardless of whether it's actually reached the Doherty Institute targets at that point.
Indeed. Cam Stewart, you were in Washington for a long time. Do you notice a big difference between the attitudes of Americans and the attitudes of Australians?
Look, absolutely. I mean, there's a couple of articles in the Australian today about the view from America on Australia. I mean, certainly, I think America has handled this year far better with dealing with COVID. I mean, there's been an acceptance, not just in America, Laura, but around the Western world, that you do have to tolerate some form of a level of deaths, unfortunately, to secure your freedoms on COVID. And so, the trick is just to get as much vaccination to the population as possible to minimise those deaths. But it's really an unavoidable thing. There's nowhere in the world that has avoided it so far. So, yeah, I think America is looking at Australia with raised eyebrows about what's happening here.